Welcome, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Sierra Sanchez, webinar producer with CGLR. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. We invite you to connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, subscribe to us at Campaign for GLR. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. And before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping details that I wanted to share. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. We also encourage you to post any questions that you have throughout the webinar in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any resources, slides, and bios that are shared during the conversation, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. And finally, we'll be posting a brief and updated on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This updated poll helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we start, I wanted to call your attention to our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon at 3 p.m., we're excited to invite you to our Big Bets Working webinar series. The first session will be focused on keeping the commitment to tutoring alive and strong. And the second session next week on the 23rd will be focused on engaging families for everyday attendance. Both of these important sessions, like I said, will be kicking off the Big Bets Working webinar series. And on January 30th, we're excited to launch our new kindergarten webinar series. The first session will be focusing on emergent bilinguals and English language learners, the Sturdy Bridge. More information on that is to come, and we hope you'll join us. And joining you now is Chief Learning and Engagement Officer, Sarah Torian.
Thanks so much, Sierra, and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you could all join us as we relaunch our Funder to Funder conversations for the 2024 year with a special session featuring our partners at Exponent Philanthropy. Exponent, for those of you who don't know, is a national network of lean funders, meaning those with few or no staff that are working to have outsized impact in their local communities. Many of the more than 500 local funders that are working in the 350 plus communities across the country that comprise the GLR network would qualify as lean funders. But like Exponent, that would qualify as lean funders, and like all of the funders in Exponent, they are working to have transformative impacts in their communities. So we're delighted to have Exponent join us for today's conversation to share their Catalytic Leadership in Philanthropy mindset and practice, which is designed to empower lean, place-based foundations and unleashing their full potential to drive changes prioritized by their local communities. We think that this approach, as well as some of the other resources that are offered through the Exponent membership network, would be of interest and relevance to the funders in our network. So happy to share. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to flag something that might cause a little bit of confusion to those of you listening in. Both Exponent and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading have our own clips. Exponent refers to the Catalytic Leadership and Philanthropy approach, typically as CLIP. And at the Campaign, we call our Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform the place where those in the network or interested in learning from the network go for peer learning and peer sharing as CLIP, because they're both mouthfuls, and that's why I'm stumbling over both. But for today's conversation, we're going to try to avoid using those acronyms so as to avoid confusing any of you who might be familiar with one CLIP or the other. Now, today's session will be broken up into two different segments. Both of them will be moderated by Deborah Jacobs, who is a member of both Exponent and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. First, we're going to hear an overview and introduction of Exponent and its Catalytic Leadership and Philanthropy approach. And then we're going to hear from a couple of GLR network funders who are lean in nature, but doing big impact in their communities. And to get us started off with that conversation, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce our panelists today. First, welcome to Andy Carroll. Serving as a senior advisor to Exponent Philanthropy, Andy leads its Catalytic Leadership in Philanthropy, helping to empower more foundations and donors to leverage their unique position and capacities to provide leadership on important issues prioritized by their communities. Welcome also to Paul Doherty. Paul is the CEO of Exponent Philanthropy, the country's largest association of funders and the only one dedicated to serving foundations, philanthropic families, and individual donors who are lean but advancing big impacts. As I said before, Andy and Paul will introduce Exponent and Catalytic Leadership for Philanthropy approach before we hear from two of our GLR Network funders. The first of those is Melissa Litwin. Melissa serves as the Early Childhood Program Director at the Henry and Marilyn Taub Foundation in Paterson, New Jersey, where she works in partnership with trustees to manage a portfolio of grants in support of positive outcomes for children living in poverty, with a focus on ensuring third-grade reading proficiency. Melissa and the Taub Foundation have been a part of the GLR Network for quite a few years, so have deep experience and expertise to share about being a part of the network. Welcome also to Matthew Peterson, who can provide a more recent perspective on working as a part of the GLR Network. Matt serves as the Executive Director of the John and Janice Wyatt Foundation based in Winchester, Virginia, providing grants and support to organizations working in early childhood education in Winchester, as well as Dorchester County, Maryland. And the Wyatt Foundation joined the GLR Network in 2022. And to guide us through this conversation with the panelists, as I mentioned earlier, I'm honored to welcome Deborah Jacobs. Deborah serves as the president and CEO of the Paterson Foundation, based in Sarasota, Florida, and supporting the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading and the Digital Access for All initiative, launched in 2020 to ensure access to devices, connectivity, and support for children and families during and after the pandemic. I'll pass it over to you now, Deborah. Welcome.
Well, welcome to everyone. And as I look at the chat box, it's rather exciting to see the diversity of who is participating today. I think this is a marvelous example of partnership. We have Campaign for Grade Level Reading, that's a national network. And then we have Exponent Philanthropy, that is one of the most expansive PSOs in our nation. And so to get us started, knowing that some of you who are on this webinar might be wearing your Exponent Philanthropy hat. Some of you might be wearing your GLR hat. So we're going to give Paul Doherty, the CEO of Exponent Philanthropy, just a little bit of time to give us the what is Exponent and why is he excited about the work that Exponent does. Paul?
Deborah, thank you so much, and thank you to CGLR for hosting us all. So I'm Paul Doherty of Exponent Philanthropy, and based outside Pittsburgh, so we're enjoying some lovely snow. But most importantly, having been a lean funder myself in previous life, it's a pleasure to be working with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. I have a background in the partnership and got to know Deborah earlier in our careers through that network. But a little bit about Exponent Philanthropy. To frame it is that we use the term or acronym PSO. The phrase means philanthropy serving organizations. So you might be a part of some in your community, whether it's your regional, your state, or your national. Exponent's community is focused on 1,600 members in every state in the United States and several other continents. And when we talk about lean funders, it's not about assets, it's about impact. It's about how monies are put into the communities that we serve. So we have members that have assets of less than $1 million as funders, individual families, organized foundations, corporations, and other institutions, up to $1 billion plus in assets. But with that diversity, our membership has got a great interest across a multitude of issues under that big tent that exists as Exponent Philanthropy. One of the key parts of our work, as Deborah knows, is that lean philanthropy is very community connected. And so those community connections, while we're a national network, we have got roots across all the country. So if you are an Exponent member and you're on this call, please put a shout out of your name and organization within the chat box. But one of the key parts coming out of the lean philanthropy community myself is that lean funders are always so interested in what they can do more for the causes, for their community, for the people and the organizations that they serve. And so when I joined Exponent just about 18 months ago, my colleague and our wonderful kind of Catalytic Leadership and Philanthropy guide, Andy Carroll, talked about catalytic leadership and the role it plays. And it was like, it's so nice to have a term to apply to the work, that batting above your average, being able to connect the resources, not just getting that 5% out, but really being a leader that you bring the resources and support to the people and the organizations that you care most about. So that's where I'm so pleased to be here. Deborah.
Well, and a key number there to me is the 1,600 members who have chosen to join. I would like to do a little commercial there as a member. It's an extremely good ROI investment, because Exponent tends to be a treasure trove of information and connections, which is invaluable. So the Patterson Foundation has been and continues to delight in being a member of Exponent Philanthropy. So I'm not supposed to make a commercial because, but I did anyway. So I am going to now turn over to Andy, but Paul, don't go away. You may have something we'd like you to add as we go through. So Andy Carroll is now going to take us into this. What is this catalytic leadership and philanthropy model, and where did it come from? So Andy, would you do a little sharing there?
Thank you, and welcome everyone, and we're so grateful to be here. Thanks to CGLR, and thanks, Deborah, for moderating. I just want to acknowledge, Deborah, that we've been following your work for many years, and recognize the many ways that you and the Patterson Foundation yourselves are catalytic funders. So over 15 years ago, Exponent really started to interview our members around the country to understand how they work, how they make impact. And what we learned and recognized over months, years of interviews and observations, sometimes visiting members where they are in person, is realizing that small place-based foundations can exert incredible outsized impact in their local communities. And we also learned and clarified that small foundations are not just mini versions of large foundations. As Paul began to explore, small foundations have unique capacities and abilities. They can focus very tightly on specific issues that their communities care about. They can persist over time with that focus over years, sometimes decades, that it takes to actually make change. And they have deep local connections as staff, donors, and trustees to local communities, which they leverage to make that kind of impact. So what we did is we synthesized our observations into what we call catalytic leadership in philanthropy. And we are doing a series of intensive training programs to empower more lean funders to get involved in this kind of outsized impact work. And it really, the core of it really gets to this idea that in your opening video of using more than money, using your convening ability, using your relationships, leveraging relationships, being able to raise public awareness of issues, using your foundation platform, being a matchmaker, being a broker in your community, funding and engaging in policy advocacy, using all the powers of a lean place-based foundation, and sometimes supporting movements. So because it's more than money, and because you're using many abilities beyond grants, there's a leadership component to this work. And that's why we do call it catalytic leadership. And you as a trustee, you as a foundation donor or a staff person may end up through the journey of catalytic leadership. You may end up being a convener, a broker, a matchmaker. You may end up doing presentations publicly in your community, sometimes even testifying before city and state commissions on issues that your partners care about. So that's a kind of the core of catalytic leadership and how we got here.
So, Andy, just again, helping people who are thinking about, there's the concept of catalytic leadership, and then there's the, what do they expect me to do if I connect through Exponent to do this? Do I have to pay extra money? Do I have to sign on for meetings to work with you? Or I want to make sure we're clear for people who are listening about what are they touching? What's happening with Exponent on this? How do you play?
Thanks for asking, Deborah. So the most direct involvement that you as an Exponent member could have with catalytic leadership is to register for one of these intensive programs that we are rolling out and that we are continuing to create and develop over the next years. The one that's coming up pretty soon is called the On-Ramp to Catalytic. And basically it is an intensive where we train leanly staffed funders in coaching skills of deep listening and asking powerful questions. And then we actually ask you to go out into the community and interview 8 people you've never talked with before, and then return to the group and process what you learned with a small group of peers and with experienced lean funders who have done a lot of this community engagement. And finally, to tease out 1 or 2 action steps that emerge from your community interviews. So that's coming up in March through May. And then in the fall, we're really excited to introduce an intensive program on advocacy using Exponent's field guide to engaging in policy advocacy. So in future years, we'll be doing programs on convening, on providing seed funding, on funding movements. So that's really one of the best ways to get involved, but we have so many resources, written and audio, about catalytic philanthropy on our website, some available to the public, some member only. And we have a catalytic philanthropy podcast that is open to anyone. And these are podcasts with catalytic leaders in small foundations who are talking about their work in their communities. So thanks for asking.
Well, and when we think about the partnership that we have here with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Exponent, there are people who are on this webinar who are they may not already be Exponent members, but they may be deeply engaged in their Campaign for Grade Level Reading. But then there's also Exponent members who aren't engaged with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So I just want to remind everybody who's on the call, it doesn't matter why you came to the party, but while we're at the party, we want to learn benefits so that everybody can take a nugget home. When I do want to I'm going to go back into those 1,600 members of Exponent. I'm pretty sure that in that mix, there are people who are in early childhood development, that are in education, that are in literacy, who may not even know about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. So I want to refresh everybody that's on here. We're here to learn about what Exponent does, but also to know that there's an opportunity, if you're an Exponent, to join the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which is a movement. And Andy triggered that comment for me, because this is, and Andy, this is where I want you to talk, catalytic leadership, it's a journey. Okay, movements are journeys. Movements start and then they connect because we are in community working. And could you just talk a little bit more, Andy, about the whole idea about this catalytic leadership journey? I mean, can people only come in at a certain time, or it's over after 6 months? How's that journey work?
Thanks, Deborah. Could we go to the next slide, please? When we talk about the journey, as you teed up, we want to emphasize that any person involved in a small foundation can be a catalytic leader. So a staff person, the donor, a trustee, a 16-year-old next-gen member can be a catalytic leader, or an 83-year-old trustee, member of the family can get involved in this work. And we have examples of people from all those roles. So the initial part of the journey has to do with focusing, and this is probably one of the biggest challenges for many foundations of any size, is the journey really begins by choosing an issue in your community or field and really committing to it over time. After you choose an issue, go out and learn everything you can about it, engage in the community, talk with people, not just in nonprofits, but in business, in government, in other sectors. Learn, listen, and this is where one of the catalytic leadership qualities really comes in, is humility combined with a sense of curiosity, is to really step back, listen and learn, and then look for where the gaps are, look for where the leverage points for change are, make sense of what the issue and what the needs are, and then recognize all the assets that you bring, which we talked about earlier at your foundation, which can include also commissioning original research and data that is needed to move an issue forward, raising public awareness, engaging in advocacy, things we talked about, and then identifying a specific role that your foundation can play that is really needed by the community or by people in the field to move it forward. And then persisting over time. We use a phrase sometimes called following the work. It means really staying engaged and doing what is needed over time to really fill the gaps and meet the needs. And maybe this is a good time, Deborah, to offer a couple of quick examples of what this can look like. So we can go off the slides now. Thank you. So I'm thinking about a micro example in Indiana, where a small community foundation leader, a program officer, made it a practice of hers to spend a lot of her time out in the community, going to various kinds of meetings, including public meetings. At one of these public government meetings, she discovered that the city was offering money for very small home-based childcare centers to upgrade their facilities. For some reason, the city had not done a very good job publicizing the availability of these funds. So the program officer alerted all her grantee partners and a lot of other childcare providers in the city about these funds so that they could apply. And she even took it upon herself to help them with some of that application work. So that's a micro example. Another example of catalytic work in Southern Michigan, a number of years ago, a small foundation with less than 2 million in assets, the Colina Foundation, operated completely by John and Nancy Colina without staff. They got really interested in early childhood education and understood the power of it. So John Colina had run a beer distribution business, and he recognized in his business the importance of meeting with legislators, and he applied that to his foundation work. So he recognized that educating legislators and educating the public was really key in moving issues forward. So John and Nancy basically started an early childhood speakers bureau where they recruited really knowledgeable people about the impact of early childhood to speak at Rotary clubs, at Elks clubs gatherings, at church gatherings, PTA meetings. And over time, the Speakers Bureau and these gatherings raised public awareness of the power of early childhood programs. Eventually, John and Nancy and their partners helped get the state of Michigan to devote hundreds of thousands of dollars more to support early childhood in southeastern Michigan. So that's an example of a very small foundation. And as Paul well knows, foundations like John and Nancy's represent the largest proportion of foundations in the entire country, those without any staff. But it's amazing to me what they were able to accomplish.
Well, and I'm going to leap on a few nuggets that you shared. One is working with organic intentionality. Don't arrive with the answer, rather let the answers emerge around the idea of possibility. So, and when you say, I wanted to add the phrase from Kung Fu Panda, patience, grasshopper. Okay, it takes time to do, so I want people to remember it takes time to do this. I want to emphasize what Andy said about the 5 external sectors. When we are interested in change, we've got to engage with people, business, nonprofits, government, and media. Because once we can all find shared aspirations, it's amazing what we can accomplish, little bricks and steps at a time. So I think at the Patterson Foundation, we often say, who else cares and what's possible? So I want to emphasize those points with Andy's comments. Paul, I'm going to turn to you in case, I bet you're bursting with something you want to share since you have been a lean funder and you're now working in the sector. Is there any other points you want to emphasize before we go over and get some examples from Matt and Melissa?
Thanks, Deborah. Coming from that mindset, you set us up as both as whether you're a CGLR member, an Exponent member, or both, is that this work at Catalytic is not just about what's pushed out, but the connections of the community built between the funders. So going back to that old nursery story of the old stone soup, is that, in that whole element back then, of everyone adds in the flavor of their expertise, they contribute what they have. So if somebody's in the CGLR community goes like, I've got this down pat, we're doing this really well, being able to contribute that to a broader audience of your lessons learned. Because, when we're in this work in philanthropy, in your state, in your region, in your community, you might not have someone taking the same approach. But I guarantee you, across like the CGLR community and the Exponent community, there are some other folks who have been there. And I'll give a case in point, is that Colleen O'Keefe with the Salary Foundation up in St. Paul, Minnesota, very active member of the Exponent Catalytic Leadership and Philanthropy community, and just a membership in general. They've done a lot of work on foster care needs. And so their work, even though they're a place-based funder, has become statewide. But they have gained so much and contributed so much to others across the country who are dealing with that unique need because it was organic. It came out of organic conversation locally. But for her to now contribute to the community, the richness that puts forward for others, but also she takes things out of it that she finds of value. So I think, funders are different in each space, but I think we'll say that there's a story if you're trying to tackle something new or look into something. There's others who have been there who you can gain knowledge from them. But if you've gone down an innovative path and you've done something different, you contributing to the pot of resources and experience. So it's not just a training, an element, it is a long-term alumni network of knowledge, resources, and even this is challenging work. that can be really good pushers and encourage you to take that next level. So those were some of the things that I've been bursting with Deborah to pass out with them, share out with everyone.
Well, and I want to I'm going to add on when you were talking about people have, at the Patterson Foundation, we talk about every person, every organization, and every community has a cookie jar. And inside our cookie jar, we've got cookies of experience, of knowledge, of talents, of resources. And so often we keep the lid on our cookie jar. And it's so important. Let's take the lid off the cookie jar, share our cookies with others, encourage others to take the lid off of their cookie jar. And so we can look in and see, what have you got over there? And then we get a lot of tasty nugget sweet cookies, but we also don't let our cookies get stale. So I think it's very important that we always come at it as the, what do you have? What do I have? What can we share together as we're trying to make change? Well, Paul and Andy, I'm going to move over to Melissa and Matt, who live day to day as lean funders making an impact. So this is where I should go in the alphabetical order, or should I do the ladies in front of gentlemen? So I'm actually going to turn to Melissa first. Okay. And I'm going to share, as you listen to Andy and Paul and I share, could you, two things, and let's first educate everyone a little bit about you and the Taub Foundation.
Hi, I'm Melissa Litwin with the Henry and Marilyn Taub Foundation, and we fund in Paterson, New Jersey. We have an interest in early childhood and literacy. And in Paterson, my colleagues at the Paterson Education Fund, they're an advocacy organization. And Rosie, I know you're here, so hi, Rosie. Paterson Education Fund leads Paterson Reads, which is a collective action grade level reading impact project with numerous partners, some in lead positions, including the Paterson Alliance, which runs Think Pre-K. And there are about 30 members of the collective impact project. We have been partnering and funding, I want to say close on to a decade. And we've gone through multiple iterations. And I'm very proud of what we've learned together over the years. I hope that's a good introduction. Please let me know what else I've been.
Heard introduction. So as I said to Paul, you must be bursting with things you want to share. As you listen to Paul and Andy, what do you think would be important for you to early share with those on this call?
Sure. So, I'm sitting with the word catalytic, right? And it's one that, feels hopeful, but, sort of also not 100% a great fit, right? Because catalytic suggests, you were a caterpillar and now fly and be free. And so I've been thinking about, what does it mean to be a catalyst for us at Taub? And I think maybe even more, it's about kind of building muscle together, right? So I'll give you an example. Pre-COVID, early in the grade level reading work, Paterson Education Fund and Taub, pulled apart those three issues: attendance, out of school time reading, kindergarten readiness. We knew we wanted to work on building participation in state-funded preschool. We knew we wanted to increase attendance. We did a project with Attendance Works. Did the butterfly fly away? Or did we have to kind of keep working on continuous quality improvement in the face of changes like COVID? But what I'm seeing now is, no surprise, Paterson has a little bit of an attendance problem in the wake of COVID and needs to rebuild. But guess what? We've got that core strength. We know what to do. We have renewed our relationship with Attendance Works. We've talked to parents. We kind of know how to rebuild. And we're doing the same thing with preschool, kind of iterating on how we leverage our connections with the preschool, with the public schools. And so I think that catalyst and humility balance really nicely and kind of become this iterative mutual building relationship. I hope that's helpful.
No, and I love the part about we're not just trying to be butterflies. Okay, we've got to stay and be caterpillars, and we need to keep finding other partners as we go forward and affirming that relationship. And Melissa, one of the things I know that over that decade of working in this space, you've had different staff changes at different partners and different organizations. And that always is an interesting dynamic. Do you have any thoughts about, oh, there's a new kid in town, and how do you bring them into the whole idea about partnering?
That is such a good question. And I think, number one, I don't have to do it alone, right? We have Paterson Alliance, which is like the Chamber of Commerce for community-based organizations in Paterson. And so there's a forum for meeting new folks and kind of bringing them into the picture. Rosie is such a steward of, that's Paterson Education Fund, of partners in the city. And I think that because we do collective impact, if there's change at one organization, there's 20 other organizations that have that continued focus, and so it's a real opportunity to kind of keep progressing. But I will also say that the depth of relationships, Rosie and I have both been around for the long term, means that we can as a funder really think about trust over control. And so something that I'm particularly proud of is in the last couple of years, our summer literacy programs grant making has not been done by the Taub Foundation, but we have turned the money over to Paterson Education Fund. And now we have a community committee that allocates those grants. We have folks in the Paterson Education Fund who are thinking about continuous quality improvement. And, for the first year, I was the grants administrator, right? I was managing the grant for Paterson Education Fund. And now PEF has staff of their own. Unique, if you're here today, hello, you're so amazing. And when I first met Unique, she was a high school student participating in a PEF out of school time learning program. And now she's a young woman, a professional, and able to carry a complicated grant making program. So,
oh boy, there's so much in what you just talked about. So kudos to your group for engaging in participatory grant making. It changes the whole dynamic when we let those who are going to be the beneficiaries actually have the voice in the decisions on what will be made. And another nugget of words that we have learned actually, and I'm pretty sure I picked it up from Exponent Philanthropy at one time, was change happens at the speed of trust. And if we're looking for long-term change, we need to have trust with who we are going to work, and that takes time. It takes relationship building. So bravo with those examples, Melissa. I'm going to shift over to Matt, knowing that we'll still come back to you, but let's shift over to Matt. Matt, give us a glimpse into the J2W Foundation and your reaction to this whole catalytic funding.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah, and it's an honor and certainly humbling to be on such an august panel. So thank you for having me. My name is Matt Peterson. I'm the director of the John and Janice Wyatt Foundation. We are a private family foundation based in Virginia, but serving Winchester City, Fairfax County, and then we also work out in Dorchester County, Maryland. We are lean, place-based, and issue-based. We have a staff of 2 and a board of 2. And we work in very specific locations because we have networks and relationships that were existing prior to the launch of our foundation. We've been around for about 3 years, and like Melissa, our focus is on early childhood education, both granular projects as well as launching and facilitating the launch of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading in both Winchester and Dorchester County concurrently. We issue about $700,000 a year in direct grants. And our grants are, we don't, as a lean funder, we don't have the opportunity to review grants and proposals. So we try to keep it to unsolicited projects. And what that really means for us is it requires a deep level of trust, research and landscaping of the issues and the gaps, and finding partners and working with them collaboratively early on, and being intentional about not looking at proposals, but looking more at project design and development, and working collaboratively on the monitoring and evaluation, and how we develop measures of performance and what success actually looks like. And we have, again, granular projects and sort of strategically our campaign and focusing on early childhood education, out of school time, and attendance. And I think for us, I honestly had not heard, and I was curious why I was invited on the Catalytic panel. And what I've come to find is, whether you call it impact-driven philanthropy or entrepreneurial philanthropy or catalytic philanthropy, in this field, I feel sometimes the vocabulary may be different, but the concepts are in fact very similar in many ways. And I think one of the things, Deborah, that I've found in listening to this panel today is the underlying requirement of building credibility and building trust, so that you have the opportunity to facilitate and bring people together. And I will say one last thing, I think for us that I want to mention that's really been important for us is very early on was using the credibility and trust that we've built as an agency in our communities to not only look at these sort of granular projects, but how do we do systems building and advocacy and having a voice that's much larger than the staff and the grants that we provide. And that's been something that we have spent a lot of time on, that's taken years of trust to build, but has been really, I think, a huge payoff for us over time. And that looks like in real life, being a part of the Virginia Literacy Act, which is a new initiative that's come around, focusing on how do we improve literacy in the state and Commonwealth. It means being a part of our early childhood regional steering committee that helps address early childhood systems building throughout this region, even beyond the communities in which we're serving. And being a part of Head Start policy councils and other boards that are really focusing on the broader, bigger issues in which we can not only represent, but have a broader, scalable voice. And I think that has really been helpful in ways now that I see that we are involved deeply in catalytic philanthropy, sometimes without even perhaps knowing it.
Yeah, I thank you for reminding us, both Melissa and Matt, about the words. May be different, but we may be doing similar things. A couple of things that, just as you were talking, it's taking a phrase from Hamilton the musical, being in the room where it happens. And it's not only should we be in the room where it's happening, it may not even be what we're funding, but if we're in the conversation, we're going to learn things. And so it's at times the non-renewable resource. So we got to figure out how to leverage, but trying to be in as many rooms where it happens and welcoming others into the room is so important. How inclusive can we be? Matt and Melissa, I'm going to kind of come at you with a different kind of question. So often in community, well, no, let me back up for a second. With the campaign for grade level reading, both Matt and Melissa talked about the three legs of the stool, the birth to kindergarten, getting kids ready to go to school. That's that early childhood development. That's that once you're in school, you got to show up. Attendance is so important. And then the out of school time. So for Exponent Philanthropy members who don't know about the campaign, if you are in any of those spaces, please look around the geographic map and see who in your region is involved with the campaign for grade level reading, so you can be involved with them. You don't need to remake another thing there. So I just wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about the network that happens in each of the communities where the grade level reading is. But I want to talk about, so many times people show up with a scarcity mentality. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough people. We don't have. And I'd like you both to talk about how you have found, as a funder on the ground, how when we come together, we can move from a scarcity mindset to a collective abundance. It's amazing what we can do when we work together. Can either of you give an example of how that moving from a scarcity mindset into an abundance mindset? Do you have any advice or an example that people might be able to take away? Anybody got any thoughts on that? And Andy, if you've got anything, or Paul, if you've got an example, this is for all team in. So if anybody's got an example, make sure I see your hand so I can call on you. Matt, do you have any thoughts about as you've seen that people actually can think about what's possible instead of what's not possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the values that I'd like to think we've provided over the last few years is being a facilitator to create coalitions of like-minded organizations together. I think one of the challenges that nonprofits typically face is the scarcity of funding within a community, and thus structurally can drive some level of competition over cooperation. You see it in the international space, and you certainly see it locally as well. And I think, again, from a trust building perspective, having a foundation be able to come in and say, we're here for the long, number one, I think a lot of things come and go a lot as well. And so there's obviously some trust about how things are going to sustain, and is this the next flash in the pan? And so I think being able to come in and say, we're going to be providing revenue or funding for years to come, this is a 10-year or 20-year project, and we're going to provide 3 to 5 year grants, I think certainly helps to create that initial trust. Bringing in the nonprofits, and an example is we brought in and developed an out-of-school time coalition in Dorchester County, which had 4 or 5 nonprofits working independently in silos, all sort of pushing for the same dollar. Bringing them together, helping them develop a sort of strategic roadmap together, funding them equitably, and then also sort of looking at the Dan Pallotta model and trying to grow the pizza pie versus finding different ways to cut up a smaller pie. I think, and thus looking at external grant opportunities and sharing that amongst them. Eventually, they start sharing grants opportunities amongst themselves. If one came into a larger opportunity, they would bring some of those partners in and start looking at multilateral approaches to bring in bigger grants that are external to the community. And I think it took years, but I think if you can demonstrate a level of collaborative opportunity amongst them, that they all can benefit and all provide benefit at the same time. And then develop a series of quick wins too, is the last thing I'll say. I think it's important to keep people at the table, to show that there's value for being at the table, that there's, we can see victories. It's not all lagging indicators that are 10 years away. So I think, seeing success, building upon that, showing that there's other opportunities, and that it actually benefits you to work together.
So I watched Melissa's head bobbing up and down there like she would. Melissa, would you like to weigh in on a little comment here for us?
Yeah. I want to talk about how grateful I am in my time in Paterson, how my mindset has changed, right? And how this resilience mindset has been fostered by Patterson Reads, and also beyond Patterson Reads by initiatives in the city. And I am thinking of the PACES movement, which was led a partnership that's intersecting with Patterson Reads, led by CUMAC, which is our food pantry. And it's the Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences. And they run a self-healing community program. I would layer into that some work that has happened under the auspices of St. Joseph's, which is our local hospital. Our early childhood program actually starts with safe and healthy and equitable birth outcomes. In St. Joseph's, they do all the formal measurable programs, but they're also looking at the piece that you can't measure, the human piece, right? And starting with the voices of birthing moms and seeing the asset and really the only way to solving the problem is listening carefully to the people who are impacted. That is the key asset to solving the problem. I want to think about how that segues into restorative justice and restorative practice, which is in the Paterson Public Schools, thanks to Paterson Education Fund, and how that approach to being in community and building community so that when problems arise, there's already a group of folks who are committed and, you know, kind of ready to come back into harmony, how that informs our work. And finally, one that I'm learning for through our Birth Equity Funders Alliance, which is a state group, and thinking about how that plays in Paterson, is this idea of mutual aid, right? Like, we don't have to have a grantor-grantee relationship. We can think about how we're all offering and all contributing to the welfare of all. I hope that's helpful. A lot.
So some things I would like to throw out there to see if anybody has a reaction. Matt was talking about low-hanging fruit and victories, and I would like to hear from anyone on Andy, if you want to come off of invisible, you're welcome to join in. But if anybody has the importance of celebrating and having a bit of fun advances community impact. Does anybody have a theory or disagree with that? No, we have no time for fun. We got to get down and hunker down. So does anybody, who's got a thought on that about celebrating and having a bit of fun as we're doing incredibly hard, important work? Anybody have a story they'd like to share? Or Paul, did you come off?
I'd be happy to, Deborah. I think there's an element of the master plan and the short-term plan that you kind of have to build into the work. And it's the value of thinking about making a good loaf of bread. And sometimes it does take a lot of practice to get there. But I give that analogy as having worked with communities that lived in scarcity for years, coming out of Appalachia, is that there's inherent experiences of the past that lead people to a trauma response that's kind of negative and or not able to really think about the potential in the big picture. So being able to build into the work points of pause and celebration and reflection, while some might say it's not fruitful, it really is fruitful for people to step back and say, wow, we've been at this for 6 months. Where is that coming out of? I look at it from some of the work that I'd done previously in the education space, but also in response to the substance use disorder crisis that affects many communities, is that being able to build in points of celebration, not just the funders, but the grantees too, to reflect and talk about whether it is simple as a potluck dinner at a local community center, or having a mini pot of funds available that all the funders pour into for a mini grants initiative that allows for some $100 grants for teachers to put work in place. But really lifting that up, have those points of celebration, but also points of accountability too. We as funders have the privilege of doing this work. And sometimes we forget that we're just as responsible in this to reflect on, are we doing the best job? So also having that ability to have the celebration points, as Matt mentioned, but also the reflection points, and being vulnerable to accept the bad news with the good news in case we've done something wrong. And so building that into, whether you're looking at this as a 6-month initiative, a 5-year initiative, but thinking through every 3 to 6 months, what is something to celebrate, to communicate out to folks internally in the network and externally, having the gatherings that need to take place, and then continue those points. Because people, some of us are big picture thinkers, and we can wait that 3-year window to get to that top of the mountain or the hilltop. Others really want to hear those points. And so that's a success I've seen, is you're moving people out of a scarcity to abundance, taking time to reflect every 2 months to 3 months and share out what's going on, having times at least twice a year to come together in celebration what's taking place. And then also having the ability to get survey feedback from folks as to, are we doing this well? And then building that into the process and reflecting on that throughout constantly builds that energy, because eventually people will realize this is not just a fluke. They're doing this for 3 months. They're not just flying in as philanthropy to help us out for a short period, but there's actually consistent willingness to work with us, and making sure it is a multi-year commitment. Those are the ones I've seen very successful across different communities in Appalachia in my tenure.
Well, and I want to remind all of us that we can't get married to the plan. because life happens. And so it's building in those points that we can make those adjustments. We actually call it a strategy refresh. You know, every 6 months, taking a pause and just going, how's this working? What have we learned? What's working? What could we do better? So I think also having that, Paul?
You know, follow-up thing also I'd want to mention is that all of us have boards that we report to. You know, whether you're a school board, whether you're the local advisory council for your campaign for Greater Love Reading, whether it's trustees for Melissa, Matt, for Deborah, for you, is that this change work takes time. And so being able to prepare our trustees, our board members to say, if they invested $100,000 today, we're not going to see systemic change around campaign for grade level reading for a few years. So also benchmarking the work that takes place, being able to build that in, and also say that there's points of joy, as Melissa's mentioned, is some different points along the way to lift those up, because some of them might be anecdotal. They might not be all qualitative or quantitative, but also being able to coach our trustees into this to be comfortable with the time of change, and being comfortable also know that they need to participate in these things, not just hear it through the staff, but they should take a role of engagement as well.
Well, and there is no single program, policy, organization, partner that's going to move this entire network of needles that we have to do. So it's having that willingness and the understanding about how long things are going to take, how long. I want to be sure on the idea of scarcity to abundance, or the idea about celebrating and a bit of joy. Did anybody have any other comments? Melissa?
Yeah, hey, I'll just weigh in. Our summer reading program has a articulated and I guess measured goal to provide joyful learning experiences for children. And I think it's been really interesting how it's changed our practice and the practice of our grantee member organizations, where, you know, when they write their grant, they're thinking about what will bring joy to children and what will help them associate reading with joy. And we've had some really interesting answers, fun field trips, crazy projects, cultural joy. We're going to pick books that reflect your culture. We're going to ask your grandma to come in and do a sewing project with all the kids so we can see the embroidery of our culture. And it's really, it's been mindset shifting and just so pleasurable to talk about joy and not talk about, you know, reading scores all of the time, right? Even though, you know, those are important too.
Matt, I think you wanted to weigh in here. Anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really runs the spectrum, and I didn't really think about the beneficiary side until Melissa just shared her comments. But I think, you know, from one end, on the beneficiary side, particularly with the kids, you know, the sort of extrinsic motivators and gamifying activities, particularly around attendance, whether it's with snow cone trucks or high school bands coming in and playing for the kids. There are opportunities on that end, but more to Paul's point as well. You know, we try to build in, and a lot of this was organic. It wasn't necessarily planned up front, but we do quarterly newsletters that really share a lot of the work that we've been doing within the campaign. Every 6 months, we get together and do an internal assessment with the Smarter Learning Group team comes in and walks us through how are we progressing and what are we looking like today versus 6 months ago. And that's really helpful from the internal side to see how we're progressing and if we're making you know, positive steps forward. And then what we're starting for the first time this year, and actually at the end of this month, is going to be an annual external community. We're all doing it at a movie theater. So we've got this big screen. We can show slides, have keynote speakers, celebrate our Pacesetter Award, which we won this year, and also show a film that's linked directly to the issues of literacy and the success ladder from early childhood to life outcomes. So that's all going to be bundled in sort of a State of the Union address that we're going to start doing annually to the community. So yeah, I think there's a ton of things you can build in, some more fun than others, but I think all very important and necessary to sharing the work and being very transparent about I think Paul said, the successes and the challenges that we faced over, you know, the years.
Well, and let's take a little second here to talk about it's okay not to have the answers and to have some learnings or mistakes or failures. And so I think the more authentic we can be about we are a learning coalition or a learning collaborative, that's part of leadership. Would anyone like to weigh in on the it's okay to say it didn't work, or that we caught it just in time before? Or is anybody, Matt, thoughts?
Well, I'm off mute, so I'm going to just jump in. I will say really quickly, the one thing I've heard over and over again was, we use a dashboard that's linked to our webpage with all of our data posted, and we did a Internet for All program during COVID with the school district to try to get internet access, broadband, to every low-income household in the community during COVID, and the uptake was terrible. And when we posted a lot of the good projects we've been doing, but that one, when we put that up there and shared the challenges we faced, and this program was just not successful, the positive feedback that came back from that, again, a lot of centered around, we can trust you because you're showing it's not just all this good stuff you're showing. And that surprisingly ended up being one of the best things that we published, was the failure of that particular program.
Well, and let's not mention that even though COVID is past, that digital access issue continues to be a real problem for our asset limited families. Definitely. Melissa, did you have anything you wanted to add on there? I'm just checking. Melissa, anything to add there?
Well, I will just say as a funder, I don't like to talk about failure so much as learning. Right? If we learn something, it's still worthwhile. And I will definitely say that we have iterated plenty with Patterson Reeds. And I think really thinking about what are the projects that match the bandwidth in the city, right? Can we do laundries and barbershops and little free libraries and summer reading? And, so I think that we iterate, we learn, and that we get stronger every year. I don't think, and that is necessary, continuous quality improvement for success. And so,
well, and that's where Andy was talking to us about, it's a journey. And so making it part of the journey that we want to continue to learn so that we can go forward from there. Yes. Andy or Paul, any thoughts you've got before I ask some more questions and take some of what I'm seeing in the chat? Anything else so far, Paul?
Yeah, Deborah, I'll just add in real quick, and this is a phrase that a colleague of yours and I's, David Beamsdiffer, who used to be at Florida Philanthropic Network and now is retiring from United Philanthropy Forum, shared, is that being vulnerable both among peers in philanthropy, but also with the community around fail, is using the acronym of first attempts and learning. So it's building off Melissa's phrase, is that being willing to be vulnerable about philanthropy in this change-making work. Is not everything's going to be successful, just like entrepreneurs. They know that a certain percentage of any project they're going to invest in is going to fail. But being able to step back and say that being vulnerable about failure and using that acronym of first attempts and learning is so critical. And I think it's true to the catalytic leadership in philanthropy, is being vulnerable with others and saying, like, when it doesn't work out, what do we take away from this? Did we not listen to the community like we should have? Did we approach something a little differently? And then being able to also admit, when you work with your trustees, this is part of the work. Not every grant project is going to be successful, in being open to that. So coaching folks to be prepared for that, but then also doing the after action review. I find as a lean funder, but also at our work at Exponent, so critical. But Andy has much more wisdom than I'll pass it to him.
I just so love and appreciate what everybody has been talking about, developing a learning culture, along the way, being open to evolution, being vulnerable. In terms of celebration, a quick example from the Exponent membership, the Potts Family Foundation in Oklahoma, foundation with just 8 million in assets, but a huge reach across the state. The founder of the foundation founded the Oklahoma Center for Nonprofits a few decades ago, knows practically everybody. One of the things they worked on was establishing a set of standards for employers in Oklahoma on family-friendly policies as employers. And they launched, the foundation and its partners launched a program to actually celebrate corporations and other employers in all sectors who were meeting those standards and adopting family-friendly policies. So when you talk about celebration, it's a way of calling out organizations in your community that are really advancing certain standards and celebrating their work.
Well, and I'm going to borrow when Andy talked about that they were working with employers. One of the things as we're trying to create a movement in community change, when we talk about engaging business, one of the things every business has is staff and employees. And when we think about how the power a business has, yes, they're there to make a profit. But if their employees are being successful, turnover will go down. If their clients, so I just want everybody to just take away, how are we working on whatever it is we're working on, engaging business in our community, because they also can contribute to the abundance spot because they have different kinds of capacity than others might have. I'm going to shift to the tough one. What happens when we work in community and we encounter organizations who have no desire whatsoever to move out of the scarcity mindset? And there's not enough, it can't happen. We need more people. It's all about the money. Give us more money. We'll be able to do what we think should happen. How do you deal with that reality that can happen? Not everybody is going to be an early adapter and innovator. So does anybody have any advice on how to, if there are organizations in your network who truly can't get out of the, it's a problem, we don't have any or not enough? Anybody have any stories of how you shifted or helped shift that conversation? Anybody have any thoughts on that? I'll just share in terms of the Patterson Foundation and the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading. You can't force anybody to be who they are when they don't want to be. We actually talk about a alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture. And if though any of those are not aligned with the shared aspirations, that's okay. We're going to work with the people who are interested in moving forward, but yet leaving the crumbs, like the little trail like Hansel and Gretel, that people can come in when they're ready, when their LWRCC works better. But does anybody else have any thought on that particular? Nope, they're stuck in scarcity. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Deborah, I can just, I do think, you talk about the, things move with the speed of trust. I think patience and credibility in the trust, I think over time, I mean, we've had some, particularly with some daycare centers within the community that weren't necessarily getting on board. They were worried for a lot of reasons, whether, we're going to see the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain and find out maybe they're perhaps not as, creating the positive outcomes they thought they were, or that they're promoting, or, they're worried about staff transitions or turnover or people leaving, or, there's a variety of reasons why we found certain centers weren't participating. And I think what we just decided was, yeah, as you just kind of described, let them be. We'll continue working with the ones that are interested in taking part and letting those be sort of the influencers. And once we've demonstrated credibility, success, and hey, this program is not going to negatively impact you, but will actually help you. What we found is 1-2 years later, they start coming in and saying, how do we get it? How can we become a part of this? And so I think, what we found is patience and just allow them to witness what's happening, see those successes. And then eventually, for the most part, they've decided to jump on board.
I believe we have on our webinar today someone who has his foot in both arenas. And Andy, would you like to introduce your colleague, Michael? But we also know Michael is engaged in the campaign for grade level reading.
Hi, Michael. So happy that you're with us today. So we've been following the work of the Thornburg Foundation for probably 6 years now, and Michael and his colleagues have been doing some really exciting work in New Mexico on a number of issues, including early childhood, maternal health, and others. And I'd love, Michael, if you have a chance to comment on how you think you're using some of these catalytic leadership principles.
Sure. Thanks so much, Andy. And it's great to be part of this webinar. I've learned a lot from listening to all of you, so I appreciate it. Deborah, one thing I wanted to just say that stood out, you quoted Hamilton, that song "In the Room," and I was pitching a grant to our board chair recently, and I said, it's important that we be in the room, and he broke out and sang half the song, and I thought, I think that means I got a yes on that grant, basically. So yeah, anytime you can get your board chair singing, you're in good shape. As I've been listening, the thing that has struck me is that as a lean funder, we recognize that it's challenging to try to change the entire system. In New Mexico, we're a relatively small state, but even at that, our education budget is around $4 billion a year that the state spends. Our grant making is $1 million. So what we've had to think through as a foundation is how can we be really strategic about where we put our resources. And the thing that I thought was relevant to this conversation today around grade level reading is the work we've done to improve the quality of teacher preparation. That's the way we've thought about influencing literacy. And specifically, our interest is in creating teacher residencies across the state for anyone who wants to become a teacher so that they would be paid to learn how to do that. And we've made a couple of relatively small grants to do that. So in keeping with what Andy described, we've made a grant to evaluate a pilot program that was already taking place in Albuquerque. Based on those results, we were able to fund some advocacy at the legislative level, saying this is something that it's worth the state funding. And we, in the last couple of years, saw the state's willingness to go from a $2 million pilot appropriation to a $20 million appropriation. And that's the kind of leverage, thanks, Deborah, that our board is really looking for. And it gets to, Paul, you use that expression, I think you said batting above your batting average, but it's how do we make our dollars go farther than they might otherwise? And then most recently, what we've done is fund an organization to provide technical assistance to our colleges of education as they build out those teacher residency programs, because that kind of implementation, making sure that it's successful, is important to earning that ongoing support from the state. So thanks so much again for letting me be a part of this conversation, and it really is exciting to learn alongside all of you.
Well, and I think, Michael, to affirm your point, this is not a linear journey. We've all talked about it. It's a winding path and knowing where we are in the journey. So thank you for contributing. I missed, Paul was bursting to tell us his thoughts on when there is some organization stuck in scarcity. So Paul, could you share a little bit of wisdom so we can have some nuggets?
Thanks, Deborah. I just, one other part is I was thinking through both Matt and Melissa's comments and Andy's as well, was that, when you receive that resistance from folks, don't give up, be able to set that agenda. And I think, one of the key parts I have seen in many times, both funders who have said they don't see the value of collaborating together with other funders, but also on the community leaders and nonprofits So I think setting the agenda and the expectations at the beginning of the process that you're going to have a bar Andy's raise on-ramps. On-ramps as things progress, but being able to report back out to those who've seen the success. And I'll use an example of community economic development related, where a number of local nonprofits had always seen the pie being cut away from them versus growing the pie. And being able to identify a common agenda that still took in their input, they might not have engaged at the time, but as the work progressed and new resources came to the table, and so this was a downtown revitalization project that funders supported, and being able to show that this is making measure, the trust was built by the actions taken by the funders. It was a 5 to 10 year window of time that they focused on. But then going back to folks and say, would you like to participate now? And so over time, as success breeds success, people realize, hey, I got an opportunity here. But also for those that were the founders, both on the nonprofits who took the risk to be involved in the partners, them being at the table, they understood that other folks might come along, even though they sacrificed in the beginning. And so being able to revisit those norms, those practices throughout the process, and don't give up. Charge ahead, because you will hit a win that all of a sudden draws attention from many different players that will bring other people along. And it also allows for you as a funder to reframe the dialogue in your community. To say, like, when we work together, these are the expectations for everybody involved, both the nonprofits and the funders. And you develop this wonderful muscle that you would not expect to move beyond the project, but becomes the operating norm. My example and point of flooding crises, which I know many have dealt with a lot of natural disasters recently. And so there are many groups who had not come together, but in the middle of a crisis, they did organize both funders and nonprofits. And some nonprofits and funders didn't come to the table. But as they were coming out of a massive flood situation, that collaborative muscle resulted not in just a response to that situation, but they go back to that as the operating norm. So you raise up the expectations of an abundance in the community. And nonprofits, instead of seeing in the fundraising realm as want to be their competition, they see it as a conduit to bring more dollars to the community. There's always more resources out there. And so reminding folks that we can leverage more together, and then that will become the practice over time. It takes time, but it really builds that out. And I've seen that grow not just in a small town. I've seen that happen across a city, across a neighborhood, across a state, really building that out. So I just mentioned that is that don't give up, be consistent, and then reframe the context of what the baseline is of that working together.
So I'm going to, Paul, there's nuggets throughout that I'm going to pull one out. The importance of communications. And again, a more than money role that funders can have in terms of communications, because it's nice that the people in the room know what is going on, but how do we make sure we're communicating beyond? Matt, you mentioned that you've developed a newsletter, okay, is one of your ways. But are there other ways you have seen funders take on that role in that backbone of communications to making sure that people know what's going on? Any thoughts that we could give our audience here to nuggets? Any ideas on role of communications or how you've seen it leverage the work? Anybody have anything on that? Well, I'll pontificate for a moment, but just the power of newsletters, the power of newsletters, social media, podcasts, and again, working with your local media, whatever form it may be. You may no longer have a daily newspaper, but maybe you got a shopper. And I always like to find out in a community who has got channels, and often it's the neighborhood department of the county or of the city who has a newsletter. We can supply content all day long about stuff. So it's the figuring out. Melissa, I'm seeing a nodding head there. So I'm going to call on you to talk about innovative communications that you have seen help.
Certainly. I think it's all about understanding where where the people you are hoping to reach are getting their media. You know, is it Facebook? Is it Insta? Is it friends and neighbors? Is it flyers at the nail salon? And I think, doing that research is very important. And I'll just share a story here in New Jersey where we have state-funded preschool that serves about half of eligible children. And we're in a funding environment where the governor is expanding funding so that more children can have access. And I know of a fantastic local Facebook group of moms and folks who live in one community but work in a community that has preschool. And this Facebook group figured out who all the community-based childcare providers were, got a group of engaged parents together, and then together went to the public schools and said, we know there's preschool expansion. We know that you'll be able to apply for our district in this month. And here are, 200 seats that are available in our community, and what you're going to do about it. And the district was like, we never would have had the bandwidth to do all this, and Facebook pulled it together. But it may be different apps for different folks. So it's really understanding your community.
Well, and we haven't used this word in every sentence, but the power of parents. All right, let us remember the power of parents if this is what we are working on in this sector. Does anybody have an example, another example of the power of parents? Anybody have, Matt? How about another example?
Yeah, so you kind of reverse the words, and that's one of the techniques we use, and that is, using the program Parent Powered. And so, when you look at messaging, and to get to Melissa's point, I think there's so many different ways. We have sizable refugee and English language learner population in our town, and they access media in a different way. And so we've tried to build a strategic marketing plan that brings all of that together, whether it's approaching folks on Facebook Live, using Parent Powered, which is a text messaging app, a tool that puts parent tips right into the hands of the families, but also allows you to do personalized messaging that you can send out messages to families. We're starting to work with pastors to try to build in positive literacy messaging into sermons at certain churches in which certain families congregate. And Melissa also mentioned hair salons and laundromats, and so there's billboards and yard signs, and so posters into certain grocery stores or Dollar Generals in different places. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and understanding your audience and hitting those from a variety of perspectives, building what we call brokers into our neighborhoods so that there are trusted neighborhood representatives that can speak to families that go beyond the school districts, which sometimes can create some tension. And so, yes, I think there's a whole spectrum, and targeting parents directly and trying to get parents to be stronger advocates for their own children's education, and having them a greater voice themselves, and also empowering them to feel like they can communicate in safe ways, are all ways that we're not necessarily doing a great job when I don't purport that, but are at least aware of and trying our best to create strategies around that.
Well, and there'll always be something new for us to learn and how to do better. So I'm going to ask each of our 4 panelists today if you have any closing remarks. So I'm going to let you go in the order that your facial expression looks like you want to be called on. So, Matt, see, was that you volunteered, or you're hiding your face? I'm not sure which one that is. So, so I would love to hear closing remarks, because we came in this session not knowing each other really well, other than Paul and Andy know each other well, but we've all learned a little bit from each other. So who would like to have some closing remarks first? Who wants to go first? I'm looking, I'm calling on Matt because he made so Matt, what's your thoughts being part of this? Okay.
Well, first off, that was a symbol to hide. I wanted to go last. So thank you for that. I will go first. No, we came into this, as I mentioned in the beginning, not really, part of the Catalytic Philanthropy or the Exponent team certainly have really come to value and appreciate all that they're doing, and is something as a foundation we're going to look into. Because everything that you're discussing, Paul and Andy, is exactly what we're trying our best in our communities to do. And that is being a small organization that is using our staff and our financial resources and our trusted voice to be bigger than we are, and to try to create change in our communities through intentional learning and partnership, and being a fabric and of our communities, and being an active member and trying to solve the challenges that we're all facing in the ways that we can in our own way. So I have been highly impressed with all of the work that's being done around these communities and country, and we're trying to be a part of that, and so grateful that it feels like we have a natural alignment. In many ways I didn't know we did, and it's been a wonderful journey for us thus far, and glad to see that there's colleagues out there going through the same.
Great. All right, Melissa, would you like to go next?
I'll just express my gratitude. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to learn more about Exponent Philanthropy and to apply the lens to our work in Paterson. And I'm also really grateful for the opportunity to share our work in Paterson with so many. If you have questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you have a layover at Newark Airport and you want to come see Paterson, I'll pick you up and we can go take a look around. But I'm really proud of the city, of the robust partnership, of the depth and breadth of the plan for Paterson's Children's, and knowing that anyone can fit in no matter what their interest or approach. There's room for everybody at the table. And so my thanks to all of you.
Okay, and now I'm going to go over to Andy.
I really appreciated learning about the work of Melissa, Matt, and Deborah as catalytic funders. And I think I wanted to highlight the opportunity to play a role in funder coalitions, and at whatever level or mode or role you want to play. But it's a great way to get involved in collaborative work, in advocacy work, in movement building work. And Jason Sabo, the writer of our advocacy field guide, mentioned an example in New Mexico where one of the funders did not want to be out front in the public space on advocacy. So this funder funded the lunches for the Funder Coalition. But that funder was at the table learning, engaging, and over time that funder got more and more involved. So the power of coalitions is something I wanted to highlight.
Thank you. Thank you. And Paul, we'll turn to you.
Talking about the richness of the knowledge that's just been shared here of the lived experiences of so many communities and places, is that's the value of catalytic leadership and philanthropy. It is not just one practice that's been written in stone, but it's adapting, it's growing, it's learning, it's improving. And so even in the space of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, is that all these different approaches really help us to become better in our work. I go back to our vision of Exponent, of transform communities through informed giving. Information is constantly in a point of updating. And so being able to share out your wins, your losses, and lessons learned are critical to us. And additionally, I know there's a question in the chat about Head Starts, and I don't want to ignore that. I know that we've got some thoughts and follow-up for folks, but this work is not, as Exponent says, not one size fits all. So this is adaptable to your space. And so if there are things that you're dealing with in your community about how to catalyze new opportunities in this leadership, please reach out to us. But I want to also give thanks for the Campaign for Greater Level Reading for its incredible willingness to be a true partner. And that's what our intention is here at Exponent Philanthropy. And thanks to Deborah for facilitating this, is that we want to go back to make sure philanthropy is benefiting the communities and the people. if our greatest evaluation of our work in philanthropy is the quality and the transformation and what is the health and standards in our community, then we know our philanthropy is working. If it's not, we have to adapt and change and respond to that, because thriving communities means our work is underway. Our work's not done, it continues. So thank you all for being a part of this, and for Matt and Melissa for sharing your great expertise and leadership.
Well, and in the world of the Patterson Foundation, one of the words that we use, series words, is connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening. And I just heard that happen time and time again during our conversation today, and it's staying the course. So appreciating each one of you. And I want to also thank Sarah Torian and Sierra and Miriam Scharf for keeping us on the straight and narrow in our preparation. So thank you all very much.
Just ditto that. I realize we've come to the end of our 90 minutes, but I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panel. I learned so much from you, and I hope you're seeing all of the appreciation in the chat. Thanking you all for sharing your insights, your reflections, and how to deepen our engagement and partnerships with existing partners in the community or potential partners, and really kind of use that stone soup model, and the sum is greater than the total of the parts. Thank you to Paul Daugherty and to Andy Carroll for introducing the Catalytic Leadership and Philanthropy model with us today, and to our amazing GLR Network funders, Melissa Litwin and Matt Peterson, for talking about how they are working and engaging and partnering with folks in their communities and learning with and from them. And thank you to Deborah Jacobs, our amazing rock star moderator today, really eliciting all of these insights and thoughts, and a great thought partner in planning this conversation today. I hope you will all tune back in just about an hour for another one of our big bets working sessions. This week's session is focusing on high dosage tutoring, understanding how tutoring is being applied as a strategy to accelerate learning recovery in communities, and how we can scale and expand high dosage tutoring to reach more kids who need it in the wake of the pandemic. Hope you'll tune back in next week for another Big Bets working session, this time looking at promoting regular attendance through family engagement and other strategies, recognizing that chronic absenteeism is just an incredible crisis nationwide. And then we will have another session, as Sierra shared at the beginning, relaunching our kindergarten series with Kindergarten Matters, with a focus on emergent bilinguals and how to support them in the early years to early grades transition. There's a link in the chat to join us for that. But again, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.